So today's video is going to be about rhythm changes. It's going to be Let the Tune Be Your Teacher about rhythm changes, and this is a subject I haven't covered, which is quite amazing. Obviously it's a huge subject, so I'm not going to be able to cover absolutely everything about this progression, but it is the progression of the song I Got Rhythm, hence the name Rhythm Changes. It's not, the rhythm doesn't change in it, unless it's Simon Peter King's version, in which case it does. But Rhythm Changes is especially the fact that it's the chord changes to I Got Rhythm, okay? And it's one of the most fundamental jazz skills to be able to play on this chord progression in the same way that it is for playing 12-bar blues, for instance. Furthermore, Rhythm Changes is a basis for many other tunes, not just the most celebrated sort of bebop heads on Rhythm Changes, like for instance Oleo, Anthropology, Moose the Mooch, things like that, but also turnaround progressions like Rhythm Changes form a major part of many other tunes, and it's really a good idea to get used to what I think of as the turnaround A section as a structure. So Rhythm Changes is a AABA tune. It's perhaps the classic example. The A section is a series of turnarounds in B flat, and most commonly this is played a turnaround in B flat, another turnaround in B flat, and then a movement to chord 4, E flat 7 maybe, and then some root back to B flat. Okay, and that's the A section. Now I want to play 1 6 2 5 3 6 2 5 1 to 4 7 and 1 6 2 5. Now this is a very simple version of Rhythm Changes. You probably have seen different versions of the same thing, and I don't want to sort of go too far into all the various variants of it, but I will just say that if it seems unfamiliar in that form, that's because there are 8 million other versions, just as there are for a 12-bar blues, okay? So this is a progression that's been heavily substituted. In fact, the way that it was originally played by many musicians in the 30s, for instance Basie, would seem pretty unfamiliar. For instance, okay, but that progression, as unfamiliar as it is, does the same thing as the more familiar version that you might know, like this. That kind of thing, right? So the progression has the same function, even though it's heavily substituted from one example to the next, and the style of playing Rhythm Changes has changed over the years, okay? So the first big concept I want to introduce to you in a tune of this nature is the fact that the chord on the first half of the beat is the one that we're most interested in, and this chord is usually a resting chord, right? It has a colour like major 7th or major 6th or minor 7th, which indicates a sort of sense of not going anywhere, and then the chord on the third beat of each bar is a moving chord. Let me demonstrate what I mean by that. So let's take our 1 6 2 5 example. So this is perhaps the more frequently taught version of Rhythm Changes. It's kind of a more bebop-y Rhythm Changes, and it goes B flat, G minor 7th, okay, C minor 7th, F7, D minor 7th, G7, C minor 7, F7. Okay, now it goes F minor 7th. So that's okay. Sorry, I'm kind of whizzing ahead here. So the B flat major 7th, that's rest chord. That's a moving chord. The G minor, beg your pardon. G minor is actually just the same as the B flat major, so it doesn't matter. You could put a G7 here and it would have the same sort of thing. C minor, that's a restful chord, moving chord. Restful chord, moving chord, restful chord, moving chord. Okay. Restful chord, F minor 7th, has a feeling of rest. Moving chord, maybe with some sort of extension, and then a restful chord, and then a moving chord, right? And then restful chord, moving chord, restful chord, moving chord. And these chords can be divided into two basic functions. So you have the tonic function, which in this tune is basically B flat, G minor 7th, the first two chords. They're both tonic function. Subdominant, C minor, and E flat major. We also have the D minor, which has that feeling of being tonic as well. So B flat, G minor, that's all tonic. Hopefully you can hear those chords kind of have a connection together. and C minor, and we don't really have it in this, but E flat, major 7th, E flat 6th, I suppose. Actually, we do, yeah. Have that subdominant function. So you can think of it as being home and away, and all the other chords between them are linking. So in that sense, we have tonic, subdominant, tonic, subdominant, tonic, subdominant, tonic, subdominant, tonic. Okay, so it kind of regularly swings between tonic and subdominant. There's a few differences. For example, in the more bebop version of rhythm changes, I played an F minor, 7th-y thing there, and then into B flat. So that kind of, instead of going back to the tonic, that's kind of setting up a kind of slightly different colour, but it still has that kind of feeling of rest. So this function, the F minor 7ths, can be thought of as a 2-5-1 going into the flat there. Okay, slightly different, you know, it's a different way of doing the same basic thing, but hopefully you get the idea that the basic structure of rhythm change is just moving from basically B flat stroke G minor stroke D minor into C minor stroke E flat. So you can construct the majority of your lines based on that principle. Okay, you can construct the majority of your voicings as well. So if I play a B flat here, and then I move to, this is an E flat major 7th chord, but it could also be a C minor 9th, right? The shape works for both. And then another sort of chord there, this happens to be an F13 flat 9 chord, and then a moving chord there. It's pretty old school, that flat 3 diminished. See, like the general voicings I'm using, like that's for D minor, for instance, moving chord, C minor moving chord, so it's tonic, moving chord, subdominant, moving chord, tonic, moving chord, and then subdominant, and then moving chord, yeah, and then tonic of some kind, maybe this one, moving chord. It could also be a, you know, just a weird chromatic static chord. So hopefully you get the impression that it's just moving backwards and forwards between these harmonic realms, and all these kind of little substitute versions of rhythm changes we have, with a few exceptions, are basically variations on that. Another way of looking at the B flat section of a rhythm changes tune is that it is a type of drone or vamp, and that's often how the older players viewed it. They weren't necessarily as interested in making the move from tonic to subdominant, they're just happy to play on the tonic. It's almost like a precursor to modal jazz if you think about it, and of course you can play rhythm changes in a modal way. You can just sit on the B flat, for instance, and play on that. And over that you can play whatever you like. You can play the blues, for instance, which is what Dexter Gordon does at the beginning of his solo on a second balcony jump, or you can play something a bit more modal. For instance, there's a great recording from the late 1940s of Lester Young playing rhythm changes, and he plays like B on it, so he's almost thinking of it as a Phrygian thing, which is quite out there for the for the era, you know. Very cool. Obviously he was listening to a bit of bop or something at that point. Maybe he'd heard a bit of Charlie Parker and he was incorporating some of these ideas. For instance, Red Cross is an example of a rhythm tune by Charlie Parker, early bebop, which has some of that kind of quality to it. So rather than being bound up in the changes all the time, rhythm changes, you can actually have a lot of freedom. Hopefully that's what I'm sort of demonstrating here. Okay. Now the B section of rhythm changes is D7, G7, C7, F7. So this is really a point where you can kind of just relax a bit. This is known as, I always get them confused, I think this is the Sears-Roebuck bridge, as it's known traditionally. I just call it a rhythm bridge because I find that easier to remember. But older musicians might refer to it as a Sears-Roebuck bridge, after the famous mail order catalogue. Okay, and the thing about that is it's 2 bars each chord, so you have a little bit more time to explore the colour of the chords. So you'll hear, for instance, Charlie Parker, for instance, on a solo, I think it's on Moose the Mooch, he plays more on the sharp 11ths, for instance. And then you can get back into B flat. So the way that people play the B section is quite a bit more expansive than the A section, but you obviously have to start digging into the chords. So while you can be quite general about the A section, you can play on the key center. You can be a little bit more specific about the B section. There's quite a few tunes that use the B section of I Got Rhythm. For instance, Topsy is an example of a minor key tune. Starts off in D minor, using a turnaround. This is famous Charlie Christian solo Swing to Bop is based on this chord progression. Then it goes to G minor, turn around G minor, then back to D minor. There it goes. So it's like a rhythm changes B section going back into the D minor, which is again another tune that does a similar kind of move but has a longer turnaround. Is Caravan, which goes from F minor to F7, C. It's F7, B flat 7, E flat 7, A flat 7, G7, then back into C7 again. So I'm just going to demonstrate those two basic approaches. So the first chorus is going to be more of a key-centric approach with some blues and some major and minor pentatonic ideas, a bit of B-flat melody. Second chorus I'm going to start moving more from tonic to subdominant, so you get more of that kind of bebop sound. Anyway, this is how it's going to work. I just want to sort of continue with a few bits of rhythm changes lore. These aren't the only approaches to the progression. There's other things you can do, but this might hopefully get you started if you find the progression intimidating and difficult or not quite sure what to play on it. First bit of lore is interesting because this is something that I see very good jazz musicians do a lot. But if you're a student of Barry Harris, one of the things he always says about rhythm changes is that early Parker never played the G7 chord in the key of B flat. He never played that, so he plays 2-5 like that. And another thing that I've heard from somewhere else is that you never hear Parker play a bridging chord, or very seldom do you in his solos, between the E flat 7 and the 1 chord. So you just hear E flat 7. Okay, so you don't hear like E diminished or A7 sharp 11. You just hear E flat 7 going back to B flat. And about another 2-5, right? So that makes rhythm changes quite a lot easier to play. I can go. Play like that, right? So I'm playing 1, and then 2-5, and then 2-3 for another 2-5. 2-5, it's 4, and then back into 1 again, right? So it makes it much more like the blues. This is the really useful way of doing it. In fact, the basic scale outline that Barry Harris uses is like 1-5, 1-5, 1-7, 4-7, 1-5. So if you ever need to have a simple way of playing rhythm changes, it's like that. But I think most people who are not Barry Harris students would think of that 5 as being a 2-5. 2-5, so it'd be like this: 2-5, so F minor, B flat 7, E flat 7, and then 1-2-5 like that, right? And then the second time around it goes E flat 7, and then 2-5-1 to close it, right? So instead of 1-2-5, it's 2-5-1 the end, and then so that makes it quite a lot easier, I think. Now the other thing is, like, when Parker does play, and if we think of Charlie Parker as being the master of rhythm changes because he didn't have to record that progression a lot, and we base our language on Parker really for this kind of thing mostly. If you think about Parker, actually, if you take a look at the Omnibook tonight and see if you can find any example of him playing a G7 in bar 1 of rhythm changes, be it like bar 1 or bar 8, or bar 24, whatever, because he never plays it in the first bar of an A section. Okay, so that means you've got B flat for 2, but then the second part, then that can be the turn back, which means we go G minor, G7, C minor, F7, right? And I usually use turn back to differentiate from turnarounds. With turn back, we go back to D minor, so that kind of creates a little bit more propulsion. Now, Barry Harris is very clear about this in his teaching. Don't play G7 in bar 1 of a rhythm changes. Why? Well, because it gives you a little bit more question and answer. You see? Kind of like, I'll do that again. So it's it gives you a little bit more kind of storytelling actually in the solo, and I find it very hard not to do the G7 because I've kind of trained myself to do that. But if I can hold back from it, it actually gives the song a lot more shape. This is interesting. Like for traditional bebop playing, that's a really hip thing to do. Again, sometimes it's good just not to play something rather than to play it. There's a few other things I could talk about. For instance, there's the famous Monk, although I think it was probably originally Art Tatum who did the substitution, where you go from F sharp and then round the houses. So it's like all dominants. So classic sort of crazy substitution for rhythm changes. Really hard to play actually. So I don't know how you do it. Okay. Another thing I wanted to talk about a little bit is the fact that rhythm changes melodies don't often fit the changes all that well. So for instance, we can think of tunes like Anthropology, which have a very descriptive sense of the harmony, and Charlie Parker tunes, but things like Olio is really just very, very simple. It's basically it's in sort of B flat with a few like little bluesy touches. Very, very simple head. Somewhat similar to Lester Leaps In. Sitting on one chord basically, sitting on that B flat. So that kind of relates to the way that older musicians saw rhythm changes as opposed to later musicians. One variant tune on rhythm changes is Charlie Christian's 7-11, which goes. Can't even play it. Again, similar sort of thing. He plays it in A flat, and better than that as well. So hopefully that gives you a slightly different perspective on rhythm changes. I think it's one of these tunes that has a slightly scary reputation about it. If you can be creative on rhythm changes, then that's one of the big kind of rites of passage, I think, of a jazz player.